China recently released its annual GDP growth rate at 6.6%, which is the lowest in 28 years. Does the slowing economy indicate the party's governance is at stake or a critical juncture? What is the Communist Party's surviving strategy aiming at that slowing economy?
Well, the Chinese economy has been slowing now for almost 10 years. It's now reached the point where it's the lowest in several decades, but it's been a gradual decline for many years. Yeah. For a long time, people thought so much of the party's legitimacy was based upon economic growth. But the party itself has sort of diversified the way that it tries to seek support from the population, not just through economic growth, because you can't continue growing at 10% forever. So it's tried to have a slower growth, but then do other things in terms of trying to find ways of incorporating public opinion into the policies, responding to people's concerns about the environment or about food safety. So in trying different ways, trying to not just grow the economy, but also govern differently and govern better. So a slowing economy does not need to be a threat to the party. But obviously, if you're a party leader and you're worried about staying in office or staying in power, you want to make sure the economy doesn't completely fall into recession or some much more dramatic economic crisis. So far, that doesn't look like that's going to happen immediately. But any political leader would be worried about the potential for a sharp economic decline. At least so far, the decline has been slow and gradual. It's given a chance for people to maybe get used to a slower rate of growth. But since so much of the previous rapid economic growth was very wasteful spending, local investment in infrastructure and roads and power grids and so on that created huge amounts of local debt, it may be that a slower growth will actually be better because they won't keep piling up more and more debt and actually be able to use what resources they have more effectively.
Vice Premier Liu He came to D.C. last week for the trade war talk. He promised to purchase more goods from the U.S., but unwilling to compromise on structural issues such as intellectual property theft. What is the Communist Party bottom line in negotiating a trade deal with President Trump? Do you see if there would be a compromise from the CCP side?
Well, the interesting thing about this current spat between the U.S. and China is that a lot of the complaints that President Trump has the criticisms that he's labeled against the Chinese government about its trade practices, about its economic model, Chinese economists have been complaining about the same thing and said it's time to move away from export promotion and move away from large investment projects and develop more of a consumer-oriented, consumption-oriented economy. So even within China, a lot of economists would agree that's the right direction to go in. The difficulty is that when the economy is slowing and you're trying to change your economic model, that creates maybe more risk than leaders are right now willing to accept. Just buying more soybeans from the United States might have a little bit of effect on the trade balance between the two countries, but that by itself is not going to resolve any of the differences that the U.S. government has been complaining about and that foreign businesses have been complaining about for a long, long time. How far the Chinese government's going to be able to go, I think they're trying to figure out what President Trump is willing to accept, and that's always a big question with his negotiating style. But it'd be hard for them to simply accept, give in to all of his demands, because that might make the leaders look weak to the Chinese society, to other leaders. But I think in order for there to be a final agreement, it has to be more than just buying more American products. It's going to have to be addressing some of the more structural factors that create that imbalance in the first place.
Do you have any specific strategy recommendations for China's side?
In terms of what the Chinese side is going to be willing to give, will have a lot to do with kind of the internal debate among Chinese leaders, which we don't know much about. Unlike the American White House, the Chinese leadership is very good about keeping secrets, and so we don't really know exactly what the debates are. In terms of things that have been discussed within China that could be part of a final settlement. Less subsidies for SOEs, moving more toward a more of a market economy, lifting some of the restrictions on foreign companies doing business in China, especially the need to have a Chinese partner in a joint venture and sharing their technology with the Chinese government as well as their partner. Those things were necessary early on when China was first starting to grow and needed to incorporate more advanced technology. Nowadays, it's less obvious. It's necessary, and sort of in order to make even Chinese firms more efficient, more innovative, ending or reducing some of those subsidies, not requiring Chinese firms to partner with foreign firms, may in fact be beneficial to Chinese companies as well.
Since the start of trade war, to some American politicians and scholars, the engagement policy with China appears to have failed. The Democrats and Republicans are united behind President Trump on this particular issue, but due to different reasons. So what is the future of this engagement? And if there's no more engagement, what is now? A new Cold War?
You know, the curious thing right now is that for the past couple of decades, really since the opening, the normalization of U.S.-China relations, whoever the president has been much more enthusiastic about the U.S.-China relationship than our members of Congress. No matter what party is in the White House, no matter what party controls Congress, the White House is always much more enthusiastic about promoting and expanding relations with China. Now, under President Trump, the president is his biggest critic of China. There are not many supporters of China in Congress. There's no really incentive to speak out on behalf of a better U.S.-China relationship because American voters are not going to reward that kind of approach. So, you know, where to find someone who's willing to kind of champion the relationship at this point is very uncertain. Even former officials have had publicly gone back on some of their previous statements and previous strategies for promoting the relationship, and now have a much more pessimistic view on both Chinese actions and the potential for U.S.-China relations going forward.
In the end of last year, a group of scholars in the China Studies academic published The Chinese Influence and American Interest Promoting Constructive Vigilance, in which it stirred the media about the Communist Party co-optation strategies to compromise key U.S. social sectors, making them extended hands of Communist Party in terms of negotiating its interests with the U.S. government. Has China's co-opting strategy really taken effect? How do you evaluate China's overseas operations?
There's been a lot of concern about Chinese efforts to try and gain influence on foreign politicians, on foreign business, on foreign public opinion more generally. Some of it's done through greater influence over Chinese language media in other countries, where the government has been able to get those newspapers and magazines to have more of an editorial position that's more pro-China than it used to be. In countries like Australia, where there have been scandals when it's revealed that China has been given campaign contributions secretly to prominent politicians, has been a big concern. In the U.S., the concern has been more about Russia and its involvement in the 2016 election. So there's a concern about when foreign governments are trying to influence American public opinion and American voting in some way. I think in the United States, the Chinese government has not had as much of a success in trying shaping public opinion about its actions, its goals, and so on. I think in general, Americans have somewhere between a concerned or either concerned about China and its intentions, or have a more negative opinion. And so it's been harder to harder for the Chinese government to be able to convince many Americans who already have a negative viewpoint to give them information that would change their mind.
In this year's Davos Forum, George Soros called Xi Jinping an enemy of the open society. by which he meant the digital control, such as the big data, artificial intelligence, the face recognition, and the social credit system, has helped and promoted the Communist Party's government. So what's your comment on that?
You know, it used to be the conventional wisdom that the internet was going to be a challenge to authoritarian regimes because it would give people an opportunity to criticize, to share their perspective on things, to be able to organize protest activities. And it has done some of that, but we've now also learned that governments of all types are able to also control the social media and websites in different ways. And the Chinese government is probably a leading example of the government being able to influence both opinion, either through censorship or by having people criticize the critics online in ways that kind of help either change the discussion online or change the opinion of people who are reading online. The larger effort to use artificial intelligence and facial recognition software to develop either a social credit system or just monitor people's comings and goings has not just been used in China, but now Chinese companies who've been developing that software are now marketing it in other countries. And so other governments are now seeing the benefits or the opportunities that these new products make available. And there's a concern about what it means for people's privacy. Even in democracies, people are concerned about the privacy that goes along with using the internet and using social media. It's even more of a concern when the government is using those same techniques to monitor what people say, what they do, where they go. So whereas it used to be thought, you know, the internet would help bring down autocrats, now it's clear autocrats can use the internet in ways that benefit them and help address potential challenges. The challenge with the social credit system is similar to what the consumer credit rating they do like in the United States. So when I want to go buy a car, buy a house, get a loan, the bank will check my credit score. And if I have questions about my credit score, I can go and get the records and find out if there was a mistake in there somehow. And if there's false information, I can get it removed. In the social credit system, it's not clear people have access to what gives them their score. So if there is false information in there, if information belongs to somebody else but was put into your credit score because you have the same name, you have no way of correcting that kind of mistake. The ability to use that social credit system not just to reward certain kinds of behavior, but more importantly to punish other kinds of behavior, and the fact that people who are being rated with this social credit system have no way of checking whether it's accurate or not. That's the bigger concern. Not just people being rewarded for being good citizens, but being punished for things that maybe they're not actually responsible for. That's going to be the bigger problem. So when people find out they can't travel abroad, or they can't go to the university, or their kids can't go to the university they want them to go to, or they can't get a loan because of their social credit score, but they can't find out why it's so low, there could very well be a backlash against it.
Last year, Cornell University suspended all its academic collaboration with Beijing's Renmin University due to its suppression of labor activists on campus. Considering the increasing academic cooperation between China and the rest of the world, how does this relation enhance or constrain academic freedom? As a professor in an education institution in Washington, D.C., have you ever witnessed or seen or heard any incident like this?
There has been a big concern about whether academic exchanges between American and Chinese universities will limit academic freedom. If there's a joint program, like here at GW, we have the Global Bachelor's Program that will send American students or GW students to China for a semester. And the question was, who would teach those classes? Would it be GW professors? Would it be Chinese professors from our partner institution? Which, you know, why wouldn't it be? In some ways, you think that'd be part of the exchange relationship. But there's concern about exactly what would be taught in the different classes. So it takes time for these programs to evolve, to people get comfortable with them. I think at GW there's been a concern about, there's a Confucius Institute on campus. Other universities in the U.S. and Europe and Canada that had CIs have had controversy about what they've done. A lot of it has to do with fear of the limits on academic freedom, that either people will self-censor or that maybe events or classes that would be offered or not offered because the CI might interfere. So a lot of it has been more based upon fears of what might happen than actual examples of what did happen. At least here at GW, we haven't had those controversies, but we're very much aware of the potential, and there's faculty who are actively monitoring these things to make sure that GW doesn't get caught in a controversy like this.
In Professor Annie Marie Brandy's paper, Magic Weapon, China's Political Influence Activities under Xi Jinping, she described the United Front strategy as one of the party's magic weapon that helped bring the CCP to power. What is your comment on the United Front operation overseas?
It's one of the areas where we don't know enough about exactly what the United Front is doing overseas. United Front involves a lot of things: private enterprises, religious organizations, any group that's sort of outside the Communist Party, both within China and abroad. But it's often not very well publicized, and that's part of the controversy, is that people are aware these things are going on, but it's not always very transparent. In Anne Marie Brady's case, she has, among other scholars, she's got a fantastic reputation, very high quality work, but her work on the United Front and her work on the exploration of Antarctica and the waters off there generate a lot of criticism within China, and so she has had personal threats against her. Her home's been broken into, and so this is not just sort of an academic debate among scholars. She personally has been threatened, and her safety has been endangered by not political activities, but just by academic activities. And so her case, among other scholars, is a huge concern, just because she's doing what academics do, and the reaction has not been to critique her work the way that we normally would, but the personal attacks against her and her home and her family have been one of the reasons that people are concerned about Chinese influence, trying to influence what scholars say and do. In Anne Marie's case, she has been consistent in maintaining her credibility and her reputation among scholars, but it's a lesson for a lot of people that there are people out there who will not have the same willingness to debate the issues, but instead go on the attack.
Thank you so much, Professor Dickson, for taking your time to discuss all these topics and issues with us.
Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you.